Hello everybody, I welcome you all to my third and final lecture on two-port network. In my first lecture on two-port network, I have discussed the basic concepts regarding two-port network, that is standard equations as well as applications of Z, Y, H and ABCD parameters. Also derived the condition of symmetry as well as condition of reciprocity for Z, Y, H and ABCD parameters. In the second and previous lecture on two-port network, I have discussed various tutorials on Z, Y, H and ABCD parameters. So in today's lecture, I am going to derive the interrelations between various parameters, that is in between Z, Y, H and ABCD parameters. These are the various interrelations we are going to see in today's lecture regarding various parameters. So in the first relation, Z in terms of Y, we all know that both Z and Y are inverse of one another. So writing the matrix form of Z parameters and Y parameters and finding the inverse of the Y matrix will give me the value of Z parameters in terms of Y parameters. Next, the relation between Z in terms of H. In order to find the relation between Z and H, first we have to write the standard two equations of Z parameters as well as H parameters. So out of these four equations, two equations will have the same variables. So first, if I consider the first equation, the variables are V1, I1 and I2, and in third equation it is V1, I1 and V2. So both are not having the same variables. Let me compare 2 and 4. Here I have V2, I1 and I2. Here I2, I1 and V2. So you can see the number of the variables which are in second equation as well as in fourth equation are same. Hence we can easily compare these two equations. So in order to easily compare these equations, I will rewrite my fourth equation as V2 is equal to 1 by H22 into I2 minus H21 by H22 into I. Comparing equations 5 and 2, I will get Z22 to be 1 by H22 and Z21 to be minus H21 by H22. So after getting these two relations, the remaining two relations can be obtained by comparing first equation and third equation. But in order to compare first equation and third equation, I need I2 in place of V2. So I should eliminate V2 and I should get I2. That can be done by substituting this fifth equation in third equation. So after I substitute the fifth equation in third equation, I'll get V1 is equal to H11 I1 plus H12. Instead of V2, I'll substitute this, and on rearranging the terms, I'll get the following equation, which indicated as sixth equation. Now comparing this with the first equation, as you can see here the variables are same: V1, I1, I2, V1, I1 and I2. Since these two equations have same variables, we can directly compare, which will give me Z11 to be delta H by H22 and Z12 is H12 by H2. So the next relation is Z in terms of ABCD parameters. So writing the standard equation of Z parameters as well as ABCD parameters. After writing them, so compare which two equations have the same variables. Here I have V1, I1 and I2. Here I have V1, I2 and V2. Next, comparing second and fourth equation, V2, I1 and I2, V2, I1 and I2. So both second equation and fourth equation have the same variables. So comparing these two, before that I'll rearrange the equation 4 in a suitable way so I can easily compare it with second equation, and I'll indicate that as fifth equation. Now comparing the fifth equation with the second equation will give me Z22 to be D by C and Z21 to be 1 by C. So after obtaining these two, now in order to compare the first equation and third equation, here I should eliminate V2 and I should get I1 so that I can compare it with the first equation. So substituting the fifth equation in third equation, which will give me V1 is equal to A V2. Instead of V2, I will substitute the fifth equation minus B I2. So on rearranging the terms, I will get the following equation, which indicated as sixth equation. Now I will compare that with the first equation. Since here both equations have the same variables V1, I1 and I2, I can easily compare them, which will give me the relation Z11 as A by C and Z12 to be AD minus BC by C. Now Y parameters in terms of Z parameters. So this is a very simple example. Since both are inverse of one another, we'll just find the inverse of the matrix, which will give me the Y parameters in terms of Z parameters. So Y parameters in terms of H parameters, writing the standard equations of both the equation. So now let us see which equations we can compare. Here I have I1, V1 and V2. Here also I have I1, V1 and V2. So easily I can compare first equation and third equation. So I'm rearranging the third equation in a suitable manner so that I easily can compare it with first equation, which will give me I1 to be 1 by H11 V1 minus H12 by H11 into V2. Now I'm comparing the fifth equation with the first equation. Give me Y11 to be 1 by H11 and Y12 to be minus H12 by H11. Now for me to compare second and fourth equation, here the variables are I2, V1 and V2. Here also I have I2, V2 and I1. So I have to eliminate the I1 variable, and that I can do by substituting the fifth equation and fourth equation. So substituting the fifth equation and fourth equation and rearranging the terms, I'll get the following sixth equation. Now comparing this with the second equation, as you can see it has the similar terms I2, V1 and V2. I will directly get the relation Y21 to be H21 by H11 and Y22 to be delta H by H11. So Y parameters in terms of ABCD parameters. After writing the standard equation, here when I compare and see the variables I1, V1, V2, I1, V1, V2, since these are not compatible, so again let me consider second equation I2, V1, V2, I2, V1, V2. So second equation and third equation. are both compatible. So comparing these two equations, before that we'll rearrange the equation or rewrite the equation in a suitable manner and compare it with the second equation, which will give me y21 to be minus 1 by b and y22 to be a by b. Now in order to compare first equation and fourth equation, here I should eliminate I2. So that can be done by substituting fifth equation in fourth equation. So here the fifth equation, when I substitute in the fourth equation and on rearranging the terms will give me this relation, which is indicated as equation 6. Now comparing this with this first equation, since both of them have the same variables, which will give me y11 to be d by b and y12 to be bc minus ad by b. Next is h parameters in terms of z parameters, writing those two standard equations. So for comparison, let us see the variables. In first equation there's v1, I1 and v2. In the third equation it is v1, I1 and I2. So I cannot compare it with the third equation. So let us take second equation, I2, I1 and v2, I2, I1 and v2. So since second equation and fourth equation have similar variables, I'll rewrite my fourth equation and compare it with the second equation. So on rewriting the equation 4, I'll indicate that as equation 5 and compare it with the equation 2. It will give rise to H22 as 1 by Z22 and H21 to be minus Z21 by Z22. Now the remaining two relations can be obtained by comparing first equation and the third equation. So in order to do so, I have to again eliminate I2 from third equation, and that can be done by substituting the fifth equation in the third equation. So now substituting the fifth equation and third equation, I will get the expression shown as equation 6. So now I can compare them as both the equations have same variables. Easily I can compare it with the first equation, which will give rise to H11 as delta Z by Z22 and H12 as Z12 by Z2. So the next is H in terms of Y, writing the standard equations. So when I compare the variables, here I have V1, I1, V2. Here I also have V1, I1 and V2. So the variables are same. So I am rearranging the third equation in a suitable manner so that I can compare it with the first equation. So comparing the fifth as well as the first equation will give me H11 to be 1 by Y11 and H12 to be minus by 12 by Y11. Now in order to compare the second and fourth equations, here I have the variables I1, I2, V2. So I have I2, V1 and V2. Here I have to eliminate the V1 from fourth equation. And that can be done by substituting the fifth equation in fourth equation. So on doing so, I'll get the following expression, which is indicated by equation 6. Now I can compare it with the second equation, as both of them have the same variables, which will give rise to H21 to be y1, y21 by y11 and h22 to be delta y by y11. H in terms of ABCD. We are also after writing the standard equation, comparing two equations having the same variables. In second equation, if I consider, I have I2, I1 and V2. In fourth equation, also I have I2, I1 and V2. So I can easily compare second and fourth equation, rewriting the fourth equation in a suitable form and comparing it with the second equation will give me H21 to be minus 1 by D and H22 to be C by D. Now, in order to compare 1 and 3, I had to eliminate the I2 variable from third equation. And that can be done by substituting fifth equation in third equation. On substitution, will give rise to the equation indicated by equation 6. Now I can compare it with the first equation since it is having the same variables, which will give rise to H11 to be B by D and H12 to be AD minus BC by D. Next is the ABCD parameters in terms of Z, writing the standard equations here. Now comparing it with two equations. Here I have I1, I2 and V2. In the fourth equation also I have I1, I2 and V2. So rearranging the equation 4 and comparing it with the second equation will give me C to be 1 by Z21 and D to be Z22 by Z21. So in order to compare now the first equation and the third equation, I have to eliminate I1 from the third equation, and that can be done by substituting fifth equation in third equation. And in doing so, I'll get the equation indicated by equation 6. Now I can easily compare it with the first equation since both are having the same variables, which will give rise to A is equal to Z11 by Z21 and B is equal to delta Z by Z21. So next is the ABCD parameters in terms of Y parameters, writing the standard equation of both the parameters. As you can see, the first equation has V1, V2 and I2. Similarly, even fourth equation has the variables V1, V2 and I2. Comparing first equation and fourth equation, before that we are rearranging the equation 4 in a suitable manner and comparing it with the first equation will give me A value to be minus y22 by y21 and B to be minus 1 by y21. Now in order to compare second and third equation, here I have to eliminate V1 from the third equation, and that I can do by substituting the fifth equation in the third equation. So substituting the fifth equation in third equation will give me the shown equation indicated by sixth equation. And now I can compare it with the second equation since it has the same variables I1, I2 and V2, which will give rise to C is equal to minus delta Y by Y12 and D is equal to minus Y11 by Y21. The last and final relation ABCD in terms of H parameters. So here I can find the similar variables if I compare the second equation and the fourth equation. As you can see, I have I1, V2 and I2. Rearranging the fourth equation and comparing it with the second equation will give me D to be minus 1 by H21 and C to be minus H22 by H21. Now to compare first and third equation, I have to eliminate I1 from the third equation, and I can do so by substituting fifth equation in the third equation. On substitution, will give me the following equation indicated as equation 6, and now I can compare it with the first equation since the variables are similar, which will give me A to be minus delta H by H12 and B to be minus H11 by H21. So this brings the end of my today's lecture on the interrelation between various parameters on two-port network. Thank you.